Hello, Naman.
Hello, Howard.
Where are we today?
We are literally right underneath the corner of the CN Tower in Toronto.
And do we have news today?
Yes, as we note behind us, a big day for Canada. The immigration plan was released today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, I noticed you at the edge of your chair, but you didn't fall off.
Look, it was an interesting discussion. On one hand, we heard the new numbers, 485,000 for 2024, and then 500,000 for 2025 and 2026. If you had asked me about a year or two ago, I would have thought these numbers would have kept soaring rapidly. But as you've heard in many of our At the Corners, there's a major issue around housing and the impact of immigration.
What do you think is really going on here?
Look, I think you've got a number of issues all colliding. You have a skills shortage. You got the government recognizing that employers need people, aging population retiring, Canada's not having the next generation of children. At the same time, you talk to children or even mid-level individuals trying to find a house, you can't find a house, and they're pointing to immigrants as being partly the source of that trouble.
What's the answer? Is there going to have to be a new approach to immigration selection?
I think that the minister is a very smart analyst. When you heard him speak today, you could tell he was parsing through some of the issues. We have to be more strategic. We have to select individuals, not generally, but specific workers that are directly needed today. And I think we've talked about this before. There are certain regions where the housing issue is not as under peril as in other regions. Maybe immigration has to incentivize people to go to other areas where we need them to be established.
They remote work in some areas where they can afford to bring up a family, and they can contact and stay in contact with employers in larger metropolitan areas if necessary in their job.
Right. I think that type of thinking, it's going to be a challenging time for the minister. One of our conversations was the tone of the discussion today. If you heard the questions from the media, it was much more U.S.-centric than Canadian-centric. There was a lot of energy and concern. So I think the minister is going to have his hands full in the next little while.
Well, I think that some of the solutions are going to have to start with the temporary entry program. In other words, if you're going to channel these people, these prospective immigrants, to locations where they can actually settle and not leave, they're going to have to do that at a very early point in time, at the time the work permits are issued, at a time when you can have more involvement with the employee and where they settle and how they do their job.
True. I think employers, too, will have to watch very carefully. We've seen this in the past when there's high public sentiment pushing against immigration. Occasionally, you can see that pendulum shift. On one hand, we have to bring people in. We've got shortages everywhere. We've declining birth rate. On the other hand, if there's enough uproar from unions and other groups, how will the minister find the balance in this environment?
Look, if employers are interested in bringing in larger volumes of temporary workers to meet their demands, they're going to have to think smart. And they're going to have to develop an approach where they already position these employees into areas in which they can bring up their families and have a reasonable quality of life. And I think that employers have not been involved in that aspect of settlement. These employees have found a place to go and barely can afford the accommodation that they're in. Employers are going to have to be hands-on.
Interesting, with some of the clients we've spoken to and they're looking at development centers, they're starting to think like that. Why not create a development center in a place where there is housing as opposed to saturating yourself in Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary? So that type of thinking, I think, really gives you a leg up politically in terms of your business strategy and addressing some of these issues that come up.
Or to say it another way, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, they would love to have you come.
Right. Lots of jobs there, too, for Canadians. You can hire them up, and it's a good story as opposed to some of the stories we're hearing now.
So this is a great immigration policy. If employers use it right, you can really benefit. And if not, employees will struggle in the short term.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.